To give an example again, this kind of a double bind consists in a mother, for instance, warning her daughter from a very early age, at a time when the daughter has really no idea what the mother is talking about, of the dangers and the ugliness of sex, and warns her of the fact that all men are bad and they're all out for just one thing. And this may, in my experience, I have seen this come about as early as 8, 9, 10, when the child really has a very, very unclear idea what the mother is talking about. The same mother may then take an abnormal, a morbid interest in the girl's physiological development. And she may, at a very early age, buy very seductive, very feminine, very adult sort of clothing for her daughter. Justify or explaining this by saying, unless you dressed in very flamboyant colors and low-cut dresses and so on, boys, you won't be popular with boys. So that this girl really gets, of course, over time, but still she gets an extremely contradictory message from her mother. The message being A, be careful, be over careful, don't do anything, and at the same time be popular, attract them, entice them. It is really quite unbelievable the power of communication, really, even I think to us who we are exposed and we are working with this all the time, it sometimes is unbelievable how powerful communications can be. We all know that hypnosis is probably a purely interpersonal communication phenomenon, and you know what you can do with hypnosis. There isn't a person who cannot be deeply hurt by an insult. Even if the insult comes from a totally unknown person, it can deeply upset me. And it's, again, of course, a communication. Now, you all know that red hair, of course, predisposes the person to impulsive behavior. This is a myth that exists all over the world, apparently. And as far as I can see, it is not. It is simply the communication of this myth that brings about the required behavior in red-haired persons. Now, a particularly important area of all of this that I cannot possibly deal with in this hour is paradoxical communication and the effect paradoxes in communication have upon behavior, and also the therapeutic value of the application of therapeutic paradox in psychotherapy. Let me, in conclusion, mention 7 points which distinguish family therapy or interaction therapy from the more familiar, no, I shouldn't say that, from the kind of therapy we are more familiar with. First of all, if you look at people interacting with each other and try to concentrate therapeutically on this interaction, you're using an approach which could be called the black box approach. That is to say, you make less hypotheses about what goes on inside the mind. You treat the mind as if it were a black box which you cannot open and inspect, but rather you concentrate on the inputs and the outputs. That is to say, the way people relate to each other, the way they influence each other by their behavior, without, as I said, placing too much emphasis on the possible reasons for this behavior or on the intrapsychic motivations of the persons concerned. Number 2 would be that therefore you are less concerned with the problem whether a certain piece of behavior is conscious or unconscious. Since you are concentrating on the effects of behavior, not on the cause, the question whether a certain piece of behavior is deliberate or not, i.e. unconscious, is of relatively small importance. If I have my toes stepped on by somebody, I can assume from the situation that this was accidental. I may assume it was deliberate. But there is no way for me to find out objectively which is which, because my attribution of consciousness or unconsciousness to this act depends on my trying to read the other person's mind, but not on a knowledge about the motivation of the other person. The other person may claim unconsciousness when in actual fact it was quite conscious, or, as we find very often in criminology, the person may claim consciousness for something that is either completely unconscious or that he hasn't even committed. So the self-reports are not very reliable in this sense. The third point is that in family therapy, there is a shift from the past to the present. You can get along with relatively little history. Now, not all family therapists are of the same opinion. If you watch somebody like Jackson work, you will find that he gets by with a minimum of history taking. He concentrates on the interaction here and now. I have a feeling that interactive patterns come about in a highly fortuitous way. I have recently seen an article about origins of asthma, where it was again pointed out that certain types of asthma can be triggered off by a purely coincidental difficulty of breathing at a certain moment. For instance, a child may have been crying, or the child may have been out of breath or something, and in this very fortuitous manner, asthma can, this may be the starting point for a whole development of asthma. Imagine the following situation as another example, that for one of many, many reasons, a newly born infant may refuse the mother's breast, especially, of course, immediately after birth, first 24 hours. Now, this can be a totally fortuitous event. Yet, it immediately sets the pace for the development of a pattern that may last a lifetime. Because the mother, on seeing herself denied in what obviously to her is the most important mother function, that is to be able to feed her child, cannot not react to this refusal. She will be anxious. On the one hand, she will try to increase her solicitude, her concern for the child on the other hand, thereby already creating a strange communicational context that even the newly born infant will pick up. Out of this may then follow a whole pattern that the two of them may find extremely difficult to snap out in later life. If you talk to these mothers, they will tell you, and not without a certain justification, he has always been like this. From the very first day he was antagonistic. I don't know what to do with him. This is a very typical statement that I think can be traced back to such an event. However, the event itself is not the outcome of any particular set of unalterable circumstances. It is extremely fortuitous. Conflict resolution people have also come across this phenomenon. North, for instance, here at Stanford, says that in 1912-13 and partly in 1914, the interaction between the European nations was such that it could have gone either way, into war, as it did, or into a kind of almost supranational kind of organization. In other words, the European nations could have come closer and closer together, even at that time, towards a unified Europe, or it could have taken the other course, as in fact it did take, and led into war. The more we look at these origins of behavioral patterns, the more I think we have to be convinced that their origin is of a very fortuitous, of a very coincidental nature. Point number 4 needs little elucidation. It's the question that cause recedes in importance and effect of something gains in importance as you look at interaction in the here and now. You do not speculate on the causes for the very reason that I have now mentioned in the first 3 points. You are more interested in the effect of behavior, no matter what the origins of the behavior in question may have been. A 5th point is that in interaction, we usually do not find the kind of circularity that we traditionally find in science, where event A produces event B in a unilateral, linear fashion. What we find rather, and this I mentioned earlier in the example of the nagging wife and the withdrawing husband, we find that the causality in these interactions is of a circular nature. And the therapy, therefore, in the first stages, usually is or has to achieve the complicated task of breaking this cycle somewhere, and it really doesn't make much difference where you break it. Therefore, early sessions in couple and in family therapy seem to me concerned mostly with finding the weakest spot in this vicious cycle and try and break in right there. Because these patterns, as I say, are circular. They go round and round in infinity. It also, this is point number 6, makes the whole question of normality, of normal and abnormal, very relative. If we accept the fact that behavior can only be understood in the particular context in which it occurs, then, as I said, it is often seen that the behavior of the so-called patient is not crazy at all. That the behavior of the patient is really the only possible behavior that he can exhibit under the circumstances in which he lives in the family situation. And finally, let me say just a few words about the question of transference. In family therapy, the transference phenomena are, of course, far less prominent. They also are far less important than they would be in individual therapy. Because the things that in working with an individual patient, you have to elaborate and guess and infer from the patient's behavior vis-a-vis you, those things very often take place right in front of your eyes, in the here and now. This is another, I think, rather important point. It seems to me, however, I don't know if my colleagues share this view, it seems to me that countertransference problems are actually greater than in individual therapy. One gets sucked in. The family situation that you are faced with invariably has some similarities to your own childhood experiences. These are usually very early experiences, and they may bring about in us a lot of countertransference stuff that is really sometimes rather difficult to handle. In this sense, at least as far as I'm concerned, family therapy makes me more anxious, much more anxious than work with an individual patient, because there's far more material that comes back into my own, pre-conscious and conscious than is the case in my comfortable position as the great therapist with a poor patient sitting opposite me.
On this point, there's always that once these discrepant partners, and then something like this going.
Yes, I would say this, yes.
Okay, this is and we get back to this